warm welcome to you all, and welcome to the third edition of Breaking It Down. Today the theme is For All, Designing for All. In part one and part two of this series, we've seen how designers can contribute to social change, focusing on involving users in the actual design process, and understanding and meeting the needs and wants of the people is crucial in designing. So in order to arrive at systems and living environments that everyone, regardless of age, of cultural background, of ethnicity, of capacity, of religion or gender, so that everybody can relate in a fair and equal manner, it is desirable to gain more awareness, to gain more knowledge, to gain more expertise with inclusive design of public spaces, of products and processes. But what does it take to get to that point? That is what we're going to talk about today. If you want to join in the conversation, that is possible. Then to do so, go to the website, deswijger.nl, and log into Zoom through the program page. There you've got two options. With the chat function, you can talk amongst each other and with the program maker of Pakhuis de Zwijger. And with the Q&A function, you can pose questions to the people here that are discussing in the program. Make sure that you mention who the question is aimed to so I can get the right question to the right person. All right. Let's start. I would like to introduce you to our first guest. Olutomain Adegbei, I practiced the name very well, is a writer, a speaker, and an advocate from Lagos, Nigeria, whose work exists at the intersection of social justice, human rights, and inclusion. Olutomain, are you there? A very warm welcome. We cannot hear you yet, but if you can speak.
I'm sure you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you right now. You prepared a presentation for us. So I would say this virtual floor is yours, and afterwards I've got a couple of questions for you.
Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Olutomain Adegbei, and I'm speaking from Lagos this evening to address the question of how inclusion happens. So in my work, I am a writer, but also I'm an urban justice advocate. And I've given several talks about what it means to build cities that are inclusive and where people can belong. And one of the things that I consider most important to emphasize in these conversations is that inclusion happens by design or not at all. So inclusion and belonging have become buzzwords, if you may, in modern times. Everybody's talking about what it means to be diverse and what it means to be inclusive. But the truth of the matter is that unless deliberate strategic action is taken to foster inclusion, it doesn't just happen, because human beings are both self-centered and tribalistic, which means that on the individual and on the social level, it is not our natural inclination to keep our social spaces inclusive. If we then want to think about what urban spaces which are shared by default mean for people in them, then we have to think about what it means to translate a shared space into an inclusive space. And in doing that, we have to think about what the culture that we're trying to foster is. What kind of message are we sending to the people who already exist in this space? What kind of people are we trying to invite into the space? What kind of work are we willing to do to make sure that the people we want in this space are cared for, have their needs met, are able to access resources and opportunities and power at equitable levels? Because I think we can admit that the concept of equality is very appealing in theory, but very difficult to execute in real life. And so we need to move away from thinking about equal access and start thinking about equitable access, because we don't all experience shared spaces in the same way. Just as human identity is subjective, human experiences are also subjective, and depending on our social location or economic location, depending on class, depending on race, depending on so many attributes that determine our experience of the world, we will experience shared spaces differently. So it is not enough to think about creating equal access. We have to think about meeting people's actual needs. If cities are going to be safe for women, for instance, then we have to think about the threat of sexual violence in public spaces. If cities are going to be accessible for people living with disabilities, then we have to think intentionally about mobility. So when we start making these deliberate efforts towards inclusion, it is also really easy to make the mistake that we can take existing systems and existing processes and expand them outwards to include people. But that rarely works because the systems that are exclusionary already are exclusionary by design. And to take that design and pretend as if it is malfunctioning is a disservice to the communities that we claim we want to serve. So streets are not inaccessible to people with mobility aids because streets are malfunctioning. Streets were designed to be accessible to a specific subset of public users. If we then want to make these spaces inclusive, we have to start thinking not in terms of expanding street access, but in terms of making sure that the end users are able to see the street as accessible. So not an inside-out approach to inclusion, but rather an outside-in approach is what makes inclusive design most effective. Because in the decision-making process of building shared spaces or creating shared spaces, there are usually specific types of people who are represented. And because, like I said, human beings are by nature self-centered and tribalistic, it is the result of this sort of narrow design thinking is what we have to live with today. So we have to start thinking, instead of going with traditional exclusionary models that have worked so far, to go from the outside, to go beyond what the norm is. A really good example of this sort of design doesn't apply to cities, but applies to people, is the Nike Fly Ease Go sneaker, which I think went viral last month. I love that shoe because I know the number of times that I've had to take off a pair of sneakers without bending down. When I saw the design, I thought, this is so brilliant and so obvious. Why has this never been done before? So I dug a bit deeper, and it turned out that this shoe was designed for people living with disabilities. The design thinking that went into the production of the shoe was that there are people who do not use their hands to put shoes on. It's not because shoes don't exist, it's that shoes have been designed with the assumption, running shoes rather, have been designed with the assumption that everybody can use their hands. So they took a different starting point. They made a different assumption. And that different assumption that they made resulted in a shoe that is accessible to people who cannot use their hands. But here's the great thing. Even people who can use their hands love this shoe anyway, because whether or not you have ability to use your hands, there are times when you're carrying things, there are times when you're running after your children, there are all of these other circumstances that make that shoe valuable for people that it was not even designed for. Right. So I just want to leave you this evening with one quote from the Nike Fly Ease design team, which says, "Always design from the most extreme case. It's the hardest thing to do, but it opens it up to everybody."
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. In regard to what you said about the shoe, the design of the shoe, am I correct that you stated if you design for the margins, then everybody in the end can benefit from that? Is that the example that you can connect to that statement?
Absolutely. I fully agree that this is a great example of what it means to design from the margins, because here they are thinking about athletes with disabilities, but in thinking about the margins first, they have automatically catered to everyone who already has alternatives, right? Because we already have access to sneakers when we don't have disabilities. But now we have this other option that allows us to have access to sneakers without excluding people who had to live with the only option that existed until now.
Right. And if you connect that to designing for cities and designing for future cities as well, you have to keep the margins in mind But what you also said was that anonymity in large cities makes it harder to understand the social structures. And if you understand the social structures, you can design better cities. Why is anonymity a barrier in developing that?
I think that anonymity is what keeps cities shared spaces without a sense of community. So we move past one another because we have to share resources. We have to communally utilize resources. But the way that cities individualize us, the way that cities force us to have tunnel vision in relation to seeking out resources to survive, in relation to socializing, these characteristics of cities alienate us from one another so that we can be in shared spaces with people without actually being in community with them. Think about bus stops, think about parking lots, think about grocery stores, even the hallway of your apartment building, that's a shared space. But there are people who spend decades in such shared spaces without ever connecting with other human beings. And if you're not connecting with other human beings, then you're not experiencing the city through their eyes. And if you're not experiencing the city, not through their eyes, I don't want to risk using ableist language, but you're not experiencing the city as they would. And if you're not experiencing the city as they would, then it just reinforces your natural tribalistic instinct to imagine that the city revolves around you as opposed to being a space that's actually shared.
And that tribalistic instinct that we all have, because that's like a survival method, if we're made aware of that, we can also be made aware of othering. Can you explain to us what othering exactly means?
So othering is this concept that I was developing for about 1.5 years at the Correspondent before it shut down. And it's the idea that there are social processes that produce the other. It doesn't just happen. It's not innate. It's not accidental. It is produced, right? So if people are allowed to remain in their sort of tribalistic silos, then they're allowed to both consciously and unconsciously reinforce the borders that exist between us and them, right? So if you're not interacting across the divide, you can continue to hold stereotypical beliefs about certain groups, or you can continue to nurture biases that you're not even aware of. For instance, it's really when I started looking into ableism that I started to realize just how sensory dependent the English language is. So we use words like see or hear to talk about perception, and we're not thinking about how that applies to people who do not have the ability to see or hear. So if I hadn't encountered people who were doing disability activism, this wasn't something that would have been brought into my sphere of thinking. So overcoming that tribalistic inclination, overcoming the tendency that human beings have to remain isolated from others is the only thing that allows us to experience life outside of our bubble or outside of what we already know.
Right. So we have to defend or protect ourselves against those tribalistic inclinations. We have to design for the margins in order for everybody to benefit from it. But in designing an inclusive city, whose responsibility is it to do that?
I think it's the responsibility of anybody with power. And what that means is that it's everybody's responsibility to some degree. But the degree to which it is your responsibility is the degree to which you have power. I do not imagine or believe that we all have, obviously we don't all have the same amounts of power. The governor of my state has exponentially more power than I do. But within the spaces that I share with other people, I have the power to speak up for people who I see are being excluded either by design or by neglect. I have the power to demonstrate what inclusion actually looks like. I have the power to teach people around me to pay attention to these tribalistic tendencies that we have. I have the power to model inclusion so that people can see that it's really not such an absurd idea as we might imagine if we haven't tried it first in an intentional way. So it's everyone's responsibility because we all have some degree of power. But I firmly believe that those who do have more power should be held to greater account for what they do with that power in designing and building and maintaining inclusive cities.
Right, they should be held to greater account, and they should be able to share that power as well in order to make place for other people. Thank you so much, Olutomain, for your explanation for now. We will return to you a little bit later, but I would like to introduce our two guests that joined me here at the table. Starting with Simon. Simon Dogger is a designer with a mission to stimulate social change in society, working on inventive, inclusive design. What that means, we'll learn a little bit later, but I would like to introduce our other guest as well. Shai Raviv is a social designer, a design researcher, and the co-founder of the Voorkamer. And the Voorkamer is an open space to meet other cultures, facilitating creativity and talent. A warm welcome to you. Simon, if I can start with you, can you tell me a little bit more about your work and your motives as well?
Yes, of course. So I'm not sure if you communicated that I'm blind.
No, I didn't. I intentionally didn't do that.
It seems to be a very important part in my life and my work. So I became blind 10 years ago. Then I decided to resume my education at the Design Academy. I graduated, and now I work as a designer. And what you mentioned, I am an inventive, inclusive designer. That means that it's just a term, that first of all, but it means that I work in innovation. And I use innovation as a sort of tool to stimulate equality. I think of ideas and put them into, well, I kind of guide the whole innovative trajectory behind it. Yeah, that's my goal. I would say that if I would have a goal, that would mean to use innovation to reach to inclusion.
Mm. And another part of your mission, if I understood well, is also redefining what is considered to be normal.
I think that is indeed a continuous process. I like to focus that I don't have the intention to redefine normal, but I think it is also, from my part, it's so I don't want to reach it theoretically, but I want to reach it very practically. That's what I do with these innovation trajectories and these projects that I engage on, is that the consequence of that eventual product is to redefine normal.
Mm-hmm. What is normal? We will talk about that a little bit later, but Shai, can you tell us a little bit more about the Voorkamer?
Yes. Well, I would like to start by the reframing that we came to, I guess, about a year and a half, which I think sums up what this place is. But we've been calling it a meeting place for newcomers and locals in Utrecht. And about a year and a half ago, after actually a lot of conversations with community members, we realized that by calling it a meeting place for newcomers and locals, we maintain a clear division, or as mentioned at the beginning, a sense of othering of who is the newcomer and who is the local, which is against what we try to do. So now we define it as a meeting space where cultures meet. So it's a place, a physical place in Utrecht, where we create opportunities for people to engage with each other on a personal level. And actually, again, touching upon what was said in the beginning, which I think is really interesting, a meeting place, that's a very general definition. And when you think about it, you would say, well, everywhere is a meeting place, you know, pre-corona times. A cafe, a cinema, a place for concerts. But you always go, you know, with your own people. And what about people who don't feel welcomed in such places, which are also, of course, commercial places often? Where do you meet new people when you just arrive to a city, no matter where you came from, but especially when you come from a disadvantaged position? Where do you meet other people? Where do you connect to the city and feel a sense of belonging? So,
and in the Voorkamer, design processes and culture are very important.
Yeah.
How does that work in practice?
Well, we see design, and that's, I would say, part of cultural processes as a medium. We try to work with design processes to create the form and the content of the space. So design as a facilitator would be guiding people to trigger or spark their talent to make the space, and making the space would be physically the stuff, and of course the content of the space, and we try to guide that with design methods and cultural expressions, I would say.
And in what way is it possible to involve the community in that?
Yeah, and always. So when we just initiated the space, which was a couple of years ago, we reached out to people that had specific talent or interest or passion, and we looked how can, together with them, we can co-create or cast this space together. So people who had experience with woodmaking, with ceramic, with metal, with textiles, name it. And then later on, when the space has shaped, this got broadened more into the content of the space. So if someone is passionate about filmmaking, then we look for how can we bring that talent into the space, and together with them create what that place is all about.
Yeah. And the principles that you found and developed in the Voorkamer, you've brought together in this book, By and For.
Yeah.
And what is explained in this book?
Yeah. So it was kind of, so actually Simon and I are both graduates of Design Academy, so that's nice, and it's a nice PR for the Academy. But as designers, we work quite intuitively and quite reactive. So you go and experiment and try it out and iterate. You rarely start, or we don't often start from theoretical basic. But after a couple of years of working, we thought, well, there must be something that guides us in our work, why we choose certain ways of working and why others not. So we've gone through a reflection process that we wanted to make for ourselves more explicit why we work the way we do, but also to share ways of working and trigger other people, places, initiatives, and governments to create inclusive spaces in other spots. So that's what the book aims to do.
Right. Simon, if you have clients that aim for inclusivity in the assignments that they give, sometimes they're not really willing to invest in what is needed to make it really inclusive. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, that happens, and I would simply say there are three causes which I see also in, for instance, entrepreneurs. Or people where business, where it's about money. So a client, their money is very important. There are three factors that are often present. They don't know how to do it. They don't have the finance for it, and they don't see the
importance.
Yeah, they don't see the importance, and these three factors, because. If you ask them if they're willing to do that, and if they think along, everybody says yes, it's very important. But then we did a research just recently with designers and technicians, and we asked them the question, do you think about it? And everybody said yes, but then do you implement it? Is it implemented in your practice? And then just a few of them said yes, but then most of them said it's not present. So these, and I think the finance part is certainly not the only one, but a very important player in this role.
And what I think is a very powerful statement that you made is inclusive design is not a favor, it's a right.
That's that's correct. Yeah.
And why is that? Because I think everybody is in agreement, but if it's a right, why doesn't everybody apply it?
Well, like first of all, I tend to focus on the Dutch society. So I don't know about the Israeli society a lot, even though I lived there for a while. I'm pointing at my other guests.
Yeah.
But I also don't know much about Ghana. So I tend to know a little bit more about the Dutch society, but may it be represent societies in the Western world, is that you know, when things are a favor, then you kind of portray it, okay, it is at your demand. If you are willing to do so, if you are willing to, you know, open up your toilets for everybody to get there, that is a favor. And when it's a favor, then it's up to people to make up their own mind. But in effect, that means that they just don't do it. And if if you treat it as a right, then there is also, you know, a right is executed, for instance, in laws. And if you execute laws, if you put up laws, then the way of thinking, and the inclusive way of thinking, that is an effect. It is not an effect of a favor, or lesser, to a lesser degree, an effect of a favor to change the way of thinking in a society. Mm. And
but should it be embedded in law? Is that what you propose? If it's a law, then you have to abide by it.
Well, laws are very particular because there are some favors, but there are also some negative sides of it, because a law is very restrictive. So you have to be very careful to implement laws. But then, on the other hand, of course, you know, it's very clear if you drive through a red light, you know you get a ticket. Or now, even they is very accurate in Corona times, right? So there is a, you know, laws is very effective in a way. But on the other hand, you don't want to be too restrictive. Mm. But I think concerning inclusion, my idea is, I mainly frame it as an idea because I don't really know, but my idea is if you implement it in laws, the way of thinking in a society changes because they get more known towards, for instance, the amount of public toilets per square kilometer, these kind of things. Mm.
But sometimes laws can be stimulating. But I also understand what you say about the other side of including it in law.
Yeah, you really need to find a balance to implement it. Actually, I don't have much expertise about laws. But
let's focus on how we can go from here, because what I noticed in the other episodes that we had as well is that everything seems to be connected with each other. So, Oli Tremaine, I would like to involve you in the conversation as well. Isn't it time to think more intersectional about designing cities for all, and have other visions be part of it? Because what we noticed is that in educational systems, in design by, for example, by architects, it's very centered about, you know, the person doing it and not exactly on the end user. But even in the end user, if I understand you correctly, we should have eyes for several margins and make the experience of the margin bigger. So how can we go to that intersectional phase?
It's like what you said, it's the opposite of what you said, not several different margins, but rather several different centers, right? Because my position is that it is not inherently wrong to design for yourself. What becomes a problem is when you design for yourself and insist that you're designing for everyone, right? Because you can only design from what you know. And it is possible for some people to expand what they know to a significant enough degree that when they design, they incorporate the perspectives of several types of people with several types of experiences. But generally, that's not the case. So instead of design thinking coming from one source or being located in one traditional perspective, several different centers will make sure that there is a richer understanding of what it means to design cities. If we're thinking about involving end users, then there's still a power imbalance there, right? It is that there is a certain group designing for another group, and then they take that other group's ideas into consideration in their design process. But to go back to the conversation we were having before we went live, if we address why it is the case that this other group isn't even represented or qualified or educated enough to be in the design group in the first place, then you don't need to design for end users, because there are several different centers represented in the decision-making process. So intersectionality, I think, is a valuable concept for thinking about how things affect people when they're already done. But I think for the design of cities, it is important to go several steps back. Before we get to the end user, we have to think about who is making the decisions and why do those groups tend to be homogeneous, and solve for the pipeline, because obviously you can't solve that problem right now, but solve it from now such that in 5 years, in 10 years, then there are more centers, more margins represented in the center of the decision-making process.
Right. Shai, I saw you nodding in agreement. And it's almost a systemic change that we have. So you can have other voices in the system already, in the decision-making process already.
Yeah. Actually, I was thinking that it's an interesting and in a way contrasting thought, that on one hand, thinking of diversity is the understanding or the awareness that there's 100 types of users and user groups and margins. And on the other hand, designing for all also means in a way that you bring all these people groups, subgroups under one umbrella. And there is an interesting tension, I think, that is important to take in mind, how to, on one hand, understand the degree of diversity and the gradient within society, and on the other hand, look for ways to cater and design for all without becoming too general.
So how do you find that balance? Because it's very impossible.
Very difficult. Yeah, I think that's something we often really struggle with, is because we open our space for people who arrive to the Netherlands. We focus on people who arrive with a refugee background, but we definitely focus on a much broader group. And when you think of that, that is not one target group. I mean, even the term target group, it's people from all different places with different backgrounds, different professions, different interests. So how do you design a place that is interesting and opens their door for everyone? And I think the answer is to look for a broad, diverse offering, and to look.
How do you do that?
By listening or by working with people who use the space, and looking for different ways to incorporate those voices and people in what becomes the space itself.
But people say, and if you look at the local government in Amsterdam, they already do that. They have evenings where people can give their opinions, and designers will include those opinions in the design. At least they say so. So we're already doing that. Yeah. So I mean the notion of these evenings, I know what you are talking about, but I think it's less about expressing opinions, but more looking for actively participating, actively making, actively showing up. Leaving your home in the evening, showing up to an evening program where you meet other people that are different than you, different than the people that you don't meet on everyday life. That's for me how you do it. Olatumain, you would like to react to that?
Yes, I was amused by the thing you said about local government taking people's opinions, precisely because it speaks to the thing I was saying about consulting with end users, right? There's an inherent power imbalance, and there is no process by which the people whose opinions are sampled can hold the people who have authority to account for the sampling and the execution or otherwise of the opinions that they have sampled.
What way is that to do exactly that? How can you do that?
How to hold people to account, or how to make them feel. I think there are many different ways to hold people to account. Protests are a great way, for instance, but I think it's better for people to make it so that they can be held to account, right? If authorities or decision makers are actually interested in implementing diversity and building inclusion, then they have to set forth the processes by which the target groups that they say they're interested in can ask them questions, track the implementation, and be accountable on their end by themselves. They have to take the initiative to be accountable, because people power is real and people can organize to hold authorities to account. But what is even more inspiring and what is even more effective is when authorities themselves make themselves available to be held to account.
Right. How can we change our educational institutions, Simon? Because that's been a topic in the episodes as well. In what way should they be reformed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would also say that's a huge question. I would even say that is also one of the keys to even think about inclusion. Just to hook into what I was saying before, you know, I'm mainly interested, beside my work and beside making products for that are innovative and mainly focus upon the visually impaired target group, is that I have an interest in looking deeper down, so the deeper rooted origins of, for instance, the society that we're in now. And if I would say, if there's one keystone to change the way of thinking, that would be the education system. And that would be primary schools, but even before that it starts.
Yeah, because you don't have to start when you're 18 or 20 when you start your education in design. It should start before that already.
Yeah, when you start at 18, then it's too late.
Yeah.
Because then you're already rooted into, you know, in the way of thinking that you've been trained with in these very important years, you know, as a child. But it's education system is the primary school. It's even before that. It is the way that you are engaged by teachers. So, and to your question, how can you change it? Well, I would be very interested to find people having the ideas, but if you look at, once again, at the Dutch society, and if you look at the education system in the Netherlands, just recently, we ended up a 5-year program of passend lezen. For the English speakers, that is translated fitting learning, something like that. And they came to the conclusion that it failed. And in that program, they tried to, okay, we take all the people and we put them in the same class. Whether you have HDD or perhaps even visually impaired or deaf or whatever, and then they come into contact with each other, and then that they would learn how to deal with these other children. Now, in theory, that's very nice. If you look at Italy, that is incorporated in their education system since, I believe, the 1970s, and it's working. But in the Netherlands, you know, we are a compromise culture, poldercultuur. And then we think, yeah, well, we want that, but we're certainly not going to spend too much money. What you see also is that many of these primary school teachers, they demonstrate because they want to have more money. But if you take out one element of the education system and the way of thinking, meaning we don't spend too much money on that, and so it's failing. So I think, to get back to your question, maybe you understand I'm a very explicit talker. Yeah.
But it's interesting what you say. But it's all about the effort. It's the intention that maybe starts out very well, but it's the effort that's put into it. And sometimes the effort is time, sometimes the effort is money. And if you don't invest enough, the result won't be the result that you need or that you want. No,
and that is what practically happens. So they.
But before, because we're running out of time, and this is a very short topic I want to touch as well. So diversity in design teams are very important, and an example that you have is the emotion whisperer. Can you very quickly tell us what that was about?
The Emotion Whisperer is a research project that looks at the influence of emotion recognition, dysfunction on social participation. Basically, it looks at me if I'm able to social participate, which is difficult. because I'm not able to see eye contact. And eye contact is a very important social key. And it has a the eventual goal or eventual tool, and where I am working now to develop that, is to make a tool that is able to scan your body language, recognize your body language through artificial intelligence, and then it translates that signal to a wearable. So I am able to feel.
But it didn't work, because I'm hurrying you along a bit.
Yeah.
Why didn't it work, and what was the obstacle there? Well, it did work, but not for everybody. No, I said it didn't work, but I meant it didn't work for everybody.
Did I say that?
No, I understood that didn't work for people with black skin.
Oh, yes, yeah. Yeah, okay. Yeah, but then to update that, we made a prototype, a very first prototype a long time ago, and that prototype was actually working in a way. It was you could scan somebody's face. It used open source software, and then you could it would translate, for instance, somebody's smile into a vibration. It didn't work on black people. That's right.
So the lack of diversity in the design team, where black people weren't represented, caused it not to work on everybody.
I don't know, but that's an option. We used open source software, so it's most likely that the people who developed that emotion recognition software didn't incorporate colored people into their target groups. That's most likely, yes. Yeah.
Right. Thank you for now. I would like to introduce our next guest, who I will talk to. He is Hisham Khalidi, and he's joining us through Zoom. Hisham, are you there?
I'm here.
A very warm welcome to you. You will tell us a little bit. Tell me, who are you and what do you do in life? Because everybody wants to know.
Exactly. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you all for this program. I've been listening, and it's really interesting. I'm Hisham Khalidi. I'm the director of Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht, and the Jan van Eyck Academy is an international residency, a post academy. And we invite over 40 participants, people, artists, designers from all over the world, and they reside at the Academy for a year or longer or shorter. And so it's a multidisciplinary academy. I mean, we have curators, architects, designers, cooks, people that work with sound. So it's very, very broad. And and next to that, we have many labs, places for artists to work in, advisors, guest advisors, and 3 institutes: Nature Research, Art and Society, and Research and Education, which sort of thinks of academic research and artistic research in the same space.
Right,
so,
and inclusivity is a
program, so it's a whole thing.
Right, yeah. and inclusivity is a very big part of the curriculum, right?
Yeah, well, it was one of the things that I put forward in 2018 when I became the director. It was important for me to start thinking about the context in which art resides, the larger context of situations in the world such as climate change and its effects. And at the same time, inclusion and diversity was all important. And obviously, I'm a Dutch Moroccan. For me, as I felt, I'm in this position now. Now I can do something, or I can at least put it on the table.
That's what we heard earlier. If you're in a position of power, you should take the responsibility to discuss things. And that's what you do as well, because you encourage the public to take part in debates about what it means to be inclusive. And today, especially, you involve people in the debate on naming the naming of the project, the new Bauhaus. The new Bauhaus, which refers to the design style from Germany. Can you explain a little bit more what you invite people to think about?
Exactly. Well, as we are an academy that also that researches design, architecture, for us it was really important sort of to put forward the positions and the way design has been taught and the curriculum of design and how we think of the history of design. And we completely understood the European Commission trying to put culture at the heart and renaming the European Green Deal as a cultural project with the title of the New European Bauhaus. Although we thought that they overthought or didn't think well enough of the effect it can have and the problematics that is entailed by naming it this way. So the first thing that I did, at least, because for me it was an intuition, right? It was like, this is not right. And then I wrote to several partners, also partner organizations, people such as Rolanda Vasquez, who is a decolonial scholar at the University of Utrecht, but others as well. I mean, Sofia Hernandez Chonki, who just had their own renaming, Melly from Witte de Wit, which is in Rotterdam. So like 12 partners, I mailed them with the question, what do you think? And people agreed with me. So I wrote a letter together with my team and then pushed this letter forward. And then after that, had it signed as sort of a petition. And we had more than 450 signatures.
But still, to make it very clear, what is exactly the problem by naming the project the New Bauhaus? Because it is in Europe, it's about a European tradition. Not everybody knows what the difficult part is.
Well, what is a European tradition? And which traditions do we feel European with? And if you start with a German light culture, leitmotif, you know, it's exacerbating a Eurocentric tone, Eurocentrism, which is at the heart of our curriculum, is at the heart of how we perceive design, architecture, and all of that.
But so again, just to take a step backwards, is it bad to be Eurocentric if it is a European initiative? And if you would define, how would you personally define a European tradition?
Exactly. Well, part of the solution to all of this, and that's why I was listening to you, and it's really great, is the curriculum itself, right? Is within the educational sphere, such as using words, naming, or using titles. These things could be part of a curriculum. Just as the word intersectionality, I mean, it means that you find the spaces where the realms intersect, such as gender, race, or class. For instance, a black queer woman, it is intersecting within the gender and in race. So those things are really important. What does intersectionality mean? What does inclusive mean? What does diversity mean? What does and these things we need to start teaching. Can I make an attempt?
Can I make an attempt in order to break it down a little bit to understand people? Am I correct in understanding if you call something the New Bauhaus, it doesn't do right or justice to what Europe consists of now or consists of in the past, because it's a very multicultural society where, you know, at least in Holland, the cities exist of minorities. There's not one majority anymore. So if we refer to something as a European tradition and disregard the fact that we are a multi-layered society with people from all over the world, you do a disservice to something that is aimed for a future. And if you talk about the future of the European Union, you should incorporate all those different voices and all those different bodies into something as a title as well. And that's why language matters. Am I correct in explaining it like that?
Exactly. You got it. This is it. Yeah, exactly.
And what was the response on the debate that you organized?
Yeah, very good. As I said, I mean, 450 professionals signed it. I mean, these are organizations as well as artists and designers. Really good people. We've had 2 meetings with the European Commission up till now, with the Office of Ursula von der Leyen and with the Joint Research Center, which is the directorship of the New European Bauhaus project. And as now they are in the design phase, which will end in July, and everybody can add to the design phase. But for us, it's just very good to have this conversation with the institutions It's also a way to bridge, let's say, the arts sector and design sector with policy making, which I find also really important. So in that sense, this is what happened, and we're really happy with it. Another thing to add to this is that by naming it Bauhaus, it's also kind of a murky history, which has its root in a modern colonial order. You have to see that Bauhaus in that time could not have known, for instance, that using concrete would be a problem, let's say, okay? Mm-hmm. So by referring it to that, it actually exacerbates a murky history, which is in fact moving forward into the future. And we don't want that, right? We want to overcome that, as we would say.
Yeah. It's still possible to support the initiative, and we've created a QR code that you can scan with your telephone in order to try and sign the letter that objects to the term the new European Bauhaus. And we will show that QR code in our screen right now. And if you would like to support it, you can use that. How much time do we have to sign the letter? Is it limited to a certain amount of time?
Actually, the closing time for the letter is passed, but I mean, please do sign it, because we use this for future projects. Our attempt was not sort of to have a one-time off project, but to keep the dialogue with the European Commission, but especially with partner institutions, especially with those schools and universities, not only those that teach the curriculum or the curriculum that is thinking about decolonization, is thinking about these matters and subjects, but especially also schools and universities and academies that don't.
Right.
And this is really important for us. And this is the way forward. I mean, and another step is that if we were to put the European Green Deal as a cultural project central to what we have to do within the next 10, 20, 30 years, it has to be a plural project. It has to be a project for all of us. This is the most important thing.
Right. It has to be a project for all of us. That's something we would like to hear, and hopefully you will succeed in that. I wish you all the best of luck with the initiative, and I hope it will change soon. Thank you so much, Hisham.
Thank you.
Well, we've reached the final stage of our program, and we've asked one of our people that we already interviewed here, architect Liongo Juliana, who's also one of our fellows, to wrap up this episode. Not only this episode, but the whole triptych where we talked about designing cities for all. So I'm looking to you, Liongo. The virtual floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Wow, 3 evenings and trying to wrap that all up. I heard a lot of interesting things that have broadened my perspective also, even though I've been, thinking about this topic for many years. And I want to thank all of you for that. I think I'm just going to throw in some quotes that I have written down during these past three sessions, and I think one of the most important one of them, well, not to, but I think it's very important. Are you aware of your biases, both conscious and unconscious? Because it's until you accept that you have biases, you are able to change. And I think that is one of our biggest challenges here in the Netherlands, is accepting that we have biases, because that is the starting point for any change in society. What I like, that was from Milis Senova. Another was by Nishant Shah. Questions are not innocent. And that I found really interesting, and what it added to me, it was an interesting research would be to check if a third generation migrant that are white are still being asked, but where are you originally from? I would really like to research that. Another one was about Dutchness. I think that was in part number 3. I don't remember who came up with that. And I was wondering, what is Dutchness, and is the Dutch hip-hop scene, is that also part of Dutchness? And it also came up to me like the Dutch-Chinese restaurant, between brackets Chinese, that I knew as a child growing up. It's disappearing. So you see new things coming in and leaving again, and being part of the Dutch society. Wouter Pokorny in number 2 was also talking about a dominant culture, and that we have different dominant cultures. And are we going to have those in pillars or in silos living next to each other, or are we going to blend those? And isn't that much, because if you talk about inclusivity, I think you're talking about bridging the silos. So there were many in the Johar. The city is not a single man's plan, but it's an iteration. Simon Kaspersen, the future is a direction and not a destination. And then today we had beautiful quotes also, and those I have to look up on my phone. Let me start with, I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce, Aulutihim. Inclusion happens by design, so you have to have this thinking, and it's not like a checklist, but it has to be intrinsic in your system, I think. You know, you have tribalistic silos. That one kept to me, Simon Dogger. I thank you so much for bringing that extra part of inclusivity for us as people that have sight, that we tend to forget that there are others that don't. So that I think that was an eye opener. I don't know if that's the right expression in this sense. I like the idea of the voorkamer. How do you name it? You name it for how in your naming you can make things inclusive and not create groups. Something I really, Hisham, the new Bauhaus, or the new European Bauhaus, and why not? I mean, you cannot use something from the past just like that for now, and because especially if you have a past that is already shown through. Is only shown through white eyes, or is only shown is whitewashed. I mean, a lot of people don't know, for instance, that the Islamic, like the Arabs, went to Europe first and then to the north of Africa. You know, that's something that is not being taught. So we think that it was from the north of Africa they influenced Spain, but it was the other way around. So we cannot just. We have to rewrite a lot of our history, and also we cannot just copy things of our history. So very, very interesting threefold of evenings, and inspiring to me, and to start my 3 sessions.
Right. Thank you so much, Liongo. And with your wrap-up, I'm really looking forward to the triptych that we are organizing with you, because this is the last episode of this triptych, the threefold part of discussions about designing cities and inclusivity. But we're starting the week after next week, we start a triptych with Liongo. We'll tell a little bit more about that later on. But for me, the wrap-up is, after presenting 3 breaking it down, it seems that designing is not only about thinking of the end user, not only thinking about changing the mindset of the designer himself or themselves. It's about changing systemic change within society, because design reflects what happens in society, and inequalities in society are reflected in design and have a future influence of what happens in our cities in future as well. And I think it's very important, and we didn't discuss that thoroughly, but maybe there's room in our next triptych for that as well. Designing for all is also designing for our future generations, and not just our children and grandchildren, but one day we will be ancestors to multiple generations. That's what Roman Krasnarek wrote about as well. And what legacy do we leave behind? That question is very important, and it influences the decisions that we make today. So we started to think about that, and like I said, our next triptych with Liongo will start on the 15th of March. And there we will talk about what cities we are going into. We will investigate human beings and their identity, and how can architecture and design facilitate your identity, and the other way around as well. How can your identity shape the architecture of your surroundings? So that will start from the 15th of March, and then weekly we can have a conversation with Liongo. So like I said, very much looking forward to that. Well, Thank you for all. Thank you for watching. If you would like to watch the episodes again, that is possible through dezwijger.nl/DCF8. If you'd like to know more about Designing Cities for All, go to dezwijger.nl/magazine. If you would like to make a contribution to the programs that we produce here at Pakhuis de Zwijger, that is also possible if you go to dezwijger/pay. There you can leave a contribution that will benefit the programs directly in these difficult times. If you would like to find more information, go to the website. There you can find more information about the live cast. And again, I will repeat it. Finally, we can see the next program of Designing Cities for All on the 15th of March. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to all our guests, not only in this episode, but also in the previous episodes. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing you again. Bye-bye.